In a quiet suburban neighborhood known for its tightly knit community and well-manicured lawns, the local homeowners association, HOA, held significant sway over the residents. The HOA's primary aim was to maintain property values and aesthetics, often enforcing strict rules on everything from paint colors to yard decorations. For most homeowners, this meant adhering to a set of guidelines that promised order and charm. But for some, it also meant navigating a minefield of regulations that could sometimes feel overly intrusive. Enter Mark Thompson, a longtime resident who had recently inherited a modest home from his late father. While Mark had always appreciated the peace of his neighborhood, he found himself increasingly frustrated by the HOA's heavy-handed approach. He had made minor renovations to his property, focusing on enhancing its charm while keeping within the guidelines. At least he thought so. Little did he know that a storm was brewing just beyond his driveway. One sunny Tuesday morning, Mark stepped out to grab the newspaper, only to be greeted by an astonishing sight. 5 massive shipping containers lined up across his driveway like an impassable barrier. Confusion washed over him as he processed the scene. Who would do such a thing? As he approached the containers, a notice attached to one of them caught his eye. It detailed the HOA's decision to block his access due to alleged violations concerning property storage, an accusation that struck him as completely unfounded. As he stood there, incredulous, Mark could hardly fathom how it had come to this. The containers were not only an eyesore, but also an infringement on his rights as a homeowner. He glanced around, half expecting neighbors to emerge in solidarity or at least in concern. Instead, the street remained eerily quiet, as if everyone had collectively decided to turn a blind eye to his plight. Little did Mark know that this bizarre turn of events would soon lead him down an unexpected path, a discovery that would change everything about his relationship with the HOA. As he began investigating the circumstances surrounding the containers, he stumbled upon a shocking revelation. He was listed as a landlord within the HOA system. This newfound information would challenge everything he thought he knew about his role in the neighborhood and set the stage for an escalating confrontation with the very organization tasked with overseeing community harmony. The morning sun filtered through the leaves as Mark stood helplessly in front of the shipping containers that obstructed his driveway. The more he looked at them, the more absurd it seemed. Who could think this was a proper solution to any issue? After regaining his composure, he decided to dive deeper into understanding the HOA's motives behind such a drastic action. Mark recalled recent HOA meetings where discussions about property maintenance and aesthetics had repeatedly surfaced. He remembered how the HOA prided itself on maintaining neighborhood standards and protecting property values, but they often operated with an iron fist, leaving little room for individual circumstances. It was now painfully evident that he'd unwittingly drawn their ire. Determined not to remain passive, Mark pulled up the HOA's handbook and combed through the rules regarding property modifications and storage. According to their guidelines, any visible storage must be neatly contained within designated areas or enclosed structures. Yet, he could hardly believe that what he saw before him, containers starkly blocking his entrance, could be justified under such regulations. It felt like an arbitrary decision made without consideration of his situation. As curiosity turned into frustration, Mark resolved to confront the HOA directly. He drafted an email outlining his concerns about the shipping containers and requested clarification on what specific violations they believed he had committed. He wanted to know why they hadn't contacted him beforehand, if there were any issues regarding his home improvements. In response to his query, Mark received a convoluted explanation citing vague references to complaints from unnamed neighbors regarding excessive clutter on his property, a claim that left him perplexed as he had taken great care to maintain a tidy appearance outside his home. The message carried an almost patronizing tone, reinforcing the sense that decisions were being made unilaterally rather than collaboratively. Feeling increasingly isolated, Mark mulled over his options. Perhaps this conflict was merely about enforcing rules rather than fostering community spirit. As he considered reaching out to other residents, particularly those who might share similar frustrations with HOA policies, he began to realize that confronting this organization would require more than just a personal appeal. It might call for collective action against what many viewed as overreach by the governing body meant to support them. As Mark stood in front of the shipping containers, a mix of shock and indignation washed over him. Initially, he couldn't quite grasp the absurdity of the situation. It felt surreal to have his driveway transformed into a makeshift storage yard without any warning. His mind raced with questions. How could the HOA justify this? Did they truly believe that blocking his access was an appropriate response to alleged violations? Anger bubbled beneath the surface as he thought about the countless hours he had spent cultivating his home's charm and maintaining its appearance to comply with HOA standards. It felt like a betrayal that the very organization meant to uphold community values had turned against him so swiftly. He could almost hear his father's voice reminding him about the importance of standing up for oneself. But the battle ahead felt daunting and isolating. Mark's frustration grew as he realized he wasn't just dealing with a trivial inconvenience. This was about his rights as a homeowner. He decided to call some neighbors in hopes of gathering support. But as he dialed, dread filled his stomach. What if they didn't share his concerns? Or worse, what if they were unsympathetic to his plight? After all, the HOA had cultivated an atmosphere of fear around dissent. Nobody wanted to be seen as a troublemaker. When he finally managed to reach Sarah, an old friend who lived down the street, he hesitated before laying out his predicament. To his surprise, she listened intently and expressed her own frustrations about the HOA's increasingly draconian rules. She mentioned how several neighbors had also received warnings for minor infractions recently. Encouraged by her understanding, Mark felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Their conversation turned into a brainstorming session about how best to confront the HOA collectively. Should they attend the next HOA meeting together? Would starting a petition help? As ideas flowed between them, Mark realized that he was not alone in this fight. Other residents were equally fed up with being bullied by an organization that had lost sight of its purpose. For the first time since discovering the containers, Mark felt empowered by the prospect of uniting their voices against what he viewed as an unjust imposition on their rights as homeowners. The day after Mark's empowering conversation with Sarah, he took his laptop to the local coffee shop, determined to dig deeper into the HOA's records. As he accessed the HOA's online portal, he felt a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. Suspicion began to gnaw at him. Could there be more to this situation than he realized? With each click, he navigated through property documents and regulations until suddenly he stumbled upon something unexpected that made his heart race. His name listed as a landlord. It hit him like a freight train. He was not merely a homeowner living in the neighborhood. He owned several rental properties managed by the HOA. The realization was both exhilarating and bewildering. As someone who had only recently inherited his father's home, he hadn't thought much about the other properties until now. But it dawned on him that this new information gave him leverage within the HOA realm, a twist that could turn the tides of this ongoing conflict. A mix of emotions swirled within him. Pride for owning property, but equally a sense of disbelief at how little attention he had paid to details that now seemed critical. How could he have overlooked such vital information? The inadvertent landlord status assigned to him began reshaping his perception of authority within the HOA framework. Instead of feeling submissive under their regulations, Mark realized he had rights and responsibilities that positioned him differently within their hierarchy. With determination renewed, Mark immediately reached out to Sarah again, eager to share what he'd discovered. He explained how being identified as a landlord altered everything. It meant he had a stake in the community and was entitled to engage in its governance. "We need to confront them," he urged her over the phone, excitement bubbling in his voice. "Our voices matter. I'm no longer just a homeowner. They can't push me around so easily." Mark began drafting a letter addressing these findings, focusing on how being a landlord granted him certain privileges and obligations regarding how HOA policies affected his properties. This newfound identity empowered him even as concerns crept in about how others might react once they learned about his status. Would they view him differently? Could this information change alliances among neighbors? Nevertheless, instead of retreating into doubt, Mark felt invigorated by seizing control of his situation. He was ready for whatever confrontation lay ahead with the HOA that had sought to block not just his driveway, but also his rights as a member of the community. With his newfound identity as a landlord weighing heavily on his mind, Mark realized that understanding his legal rights was crucial to confronting the HOA effectively. He set aside time to research not only the HOA regulations, but also local property laws that might grant him additional leverage in this ongoing conflict. Armed with determination, he headed to the local law library, hoping to uncover information that would empower him further. As he sifted through legal texts and community guidelines, Mark discovered vital information about homeowner rights concerning access to property and the limitations of HOA authority. Many of the provisions emphasized that while HOAs could enforce rules for aesthetic purposes, they were also bound by state laws that protected homeowners' rights to access their properties. The more he read, the more confident he became that the HOA might be overstepping its boundaries in blocking his driveway. Feeling energized by his findings, Mark scheduled a consultation with a local attorney who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. During their meeting, he explained the situation in detail, including the unexpected revelation of his landlord status. The attorney nodded along, taking notes and asking probing questions about the HOA's actions. After reviewing the HOA's bylaws and regulations, the attorney confirmed what Mark had suspected. The HOA was likely acting beyond its authority by arbitrarily blocking access to his property without a proper process. Your rights as a landlord add another layer to this situation, the attorney pointed out. You have a responsibility to uphold the community's welfare, but they also have obligations to you as a property owner. Armed with this knowledge, Mark felt a surge of empowerment. The notion that he wasn't just fighting for himself, but for all the residents affected by oppressive HOA policies began to solidify in his mind. Before leaving the office, Mark discussed potential strategies with the attorney, including sending a formal letter outlining his legal rights and requesting immediate removal of the shipping containers. The attorney suggested that Mark might also consider organizing a meeting with other homeowners and inviting them to share their own experiences with the HOA. As Mark walked out of the law office, he felt a sense of purpose filling him. No longer just an aggrieved homeowner, he was now a proactive advocate for change within his community. With each step he took back to his neighborhood, thoughts raced through his mind about how best to engage with both the HOA and his fellow residents. Determined to transform frustration into action and reclaim his rightful access to his property. With a clear strategy in mind, Mark prepared to engage with the HOA on multiple fronts. He sat down to draft a formal letter, articulating his grievances regarding the shipping containers blocking his driveway and emphasizing his rights as both a homeowner and landlord. He highlighted the potential overreach of the HOA's authority, citing specific laws and regulations that protected residents from such actions. His fingers danced over the keyboard as he poured his frustrations into each carefully chosen word, striving for a tone that was assertive yet respectful. As he finalized the letter, Mark felt a surge of confidence. This was not just about him, but about safeguarding the rights of all owners in his community. With the document polished, he printed out several copies to distribute among other residents who had expressed concerns about the HOA's stringent policies. Together, they could amplify their voices and make it clear that they would no longer tolerate arbitrary enforcement of rules. The following afternoon, Mark organized a gathering at his home to discuss their collective issues with the HOA. Several neighbors attended, each bringing their own experiences of feeling oppressed by the association's overbearing rules. It was refreshing for Mark to see so many familiar faces rallying together. There was power in unity, and it invigorated him further. Sharing an array of experiences ranging from minor infractions leading to needless fines to outright intimidation during HOA meetings, the group discussed how they could approach the situation cohesively. Mark outlined his plan for addressing the HOA formally while also suggesting they invite other concerned homeowners into their fold for greater impact. Feeling emboldened by this newfound sense of community, they agreed to sign Mark's letter collectively before sending it off, an action that symbolized their combined strength and determination to stand up against any injustices perpetrated by the HOA. As evening approached, Mark completed their letter and prepared it for delivery. Their words would not only advocate for his own situation, but also signal a shift in community dynamics. Residents no longer submissive, but actively engaged in defending their rights. When he arrived at the HOA office later that week, clutching the signed letter in hand with his heart racing from adrenaline, he felt ready, not just to confront them about past grievances, but to initiate a dialogue aimed at fostering mutual respect within the neighborhood moving forward. The battle had officially begun, but Mark was equipped with newfound allies and unwavering resolve, ready to challenge an organization that had long wielded unnecessary power over their lives. As Mark's signed letter made its way to the HOA office, the atmosphere in the neighborhood began to shift. News of his initiative spread quickly, igniting conversations among residents who had previously felt disempowered by the association's strict regulations. Many began to share their own stories of frustration and fear regarding the HOA's actions, which ranged from minor fines to more serious threats of legal repercussions for perceived violations. Some neighbors who had once kept silent about their grievances found newfound courage, inspired by Mark's willingness to stand up against the HOA. Local gatherings became a regular occurrence, with residents discussing strategies not only to address their individual concerns, but also to foster a sense of community solidarity. People who had never spoken to each other before were now collaborating, sharing resources and information, and even brainstorming ideas for potential changes in HOA governance. The day after the letter was sent, Mark received texts and calls from several neighbors expressing their support. Some offered to join him in the next HOA meeting, eager to present a united front. Others suggested forming a homeowners committee that could actively engage with the board about community issues going forward. This collective energy invigorated Mark, reinforcing his belief that they could effect real change together. When the meeting day arrived, Mark felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. He arrived early, joined by several supportive neighbors who came ready to voice their concerns. As they entered the meeting room, filled with HOA board members, he sensed a palpable tension. This was no longer just about one man's driveway. It was a community standing up against what they perceived as unjust treatment. During the meeting, Mark and his neighbors took turns speaking passionately about their experiences with the HOA while referencing the letter they had sent. The board members listened intently, but maintained their usual stoic expressions. However, it became evident that they were taken aback by this unexpected show of unity among residents, many of whom had previously been reluctant to challenge them. As issues were raised about transparency in decision-making and enforcement practices, some board members exchanged glances that hinted at concern. It appeared that they hadn't anticipated such pushback from residents who had previously accepted decisions without question. By the end of the meeting, Mark felt an undeniable shift in dynamics. He realized that they weren't just fighting for his driveway, but rather reclaiming their rights as homeowners within a community that should prioritize collaboration over oppression. The seeds of change had been planted, and for the first time in years, it seemed like the residents might finally have a voice in shaping their neighborhood's future. Following the powerful meeting with the HOA, Mark and his neighbors felt a surge of hope, but knew that action was needed to ensure their concerns were taken seriously. The board had listened, but it remained unclear whether they would take meaningful steps to address the issues raised. Determined not to lose momentum, Mark proposed a series of resolution attempts aimed at fostering dialogue and promoting transparency. First, he suggested that the residents request a follow-up meeting with the HOA board to further discuss their grievances and seek clarity on how decisions were made regarding the shipping containers and other regulations affecting homeowners. This time, they would come prepared with specific proposals for improving communication channels between residents and the HOA. They wanted to advocate for regular town hall meetings where homeowners could voice concerns and share feedback openly. Next, Mark and a few volunteers began drafting a set of community guidelines that emphasized cooperation and respect among residents and the HOA. The idea was to create a framework that would encourage collaboration rather than conflict. They envisioned a neighborhood where residents felt empowered to participate in governance, ensuring everyone had a stake in maintaining the community's values. As they worked on these initiatives, Mark also encouraged his neighbors to share their experiences in writing, creating a comprehensive document detailing instances of perceived overreach by the HOA. This record would serve as evidence during future discussions with the board, illustrating a pattern of behavior that needed to change for the benefit of all. However, not every neighbor was on board with Mark's approach. Some were wary of engaging further with the HOA, fearing repercussions or backlash from board members who had previously been hostile. Mark understood these concerns, but reminded everyone that collective action was their best defense against potential retaliation. He reassured his neighbors that standing together would provide them with strength and protection. The day of the follow-up meeting arrived, and anxiety tinged the air as Mark and his fellow residents gathered outside the HOA office. This time, they were not just presenting complaints. They came armed with proposals for constructive change. As they entered the meeting room, Mark felt an electric sense of possibility. They were no longer passive subjects under HOA rule, but active participants ready to reclaim their voices. Throughout the meeting, Mark eloquently presented their ideas while emphasizing community collaboration. The tone shifted as board members began to engage more openly with ideas put forth by residents. It became clear that this wasn't merely about resolving one incident, but about transforming their relationship with the HOA into one characterized by respect and partnership. The seeds sown during these discussions ignited renewed optimism among residents. Perhaps they truly could reshape their community's future by fostering dialogue and understanding, a vital step toward healing long-standing rifts between homeowners and their governing body. As the dust settled from the tumultuous journey Mark Thompson had undertaken, he found himself reflecting deeply on the events that had transpired. The conflict with the HOA had begun as a personal battle over his block driveway, but had evolved into a movement that united his community. Mark mused about how a single incident could ignite such collective action, transforming passive homeowners into active participants in their governance. This realization was both humbling and empowering. Initially, Mark had felt overwhelmed by the HOA's authority and the fear of confrontation. However, as he navigated through legal research, engaged with neighbors, and advocated for their rights, he began to see himself not just as a victim of circumstance, but as a catalyst for change. The experience had reshaped his identity within his neighborhood. He was no longer merely a landlord or homeowner, but an advocate and leader who dared to challenge the status quo. Mark also reflected on the importance of community support throughout this process. He recognized that the shared experiences of his neighbors had been instrumental in building momentum against an organization that often operated in isolation. Their collective voices had not only amplified individual grievances, but fostered a sense of solidarity that many residents had long yearned for. In witnessing their transformation from fearful compliance to empowered activism, Mark felt a sense of pride swell within him. The journey had not been easy. It was fraught with moments of doubt and anxiety about potential backlash from the HOA. Yet, facing those fears together with his neighbors forged connections that transcended mere neighborly ties. They had come to understand one another's frustrations and aspirations on a deeper level, forming friendships that would likely outlast the current conflict. In contemplating the future, Mark remained cautiously optimistic. The path ahead would not be devoid of challenges. He knew that resistance from the HOA could persist even after these initial victories. However, for the first time, he felt equipped with tools for advocacy, knowledge of regulations, legal backing, and most importantly, a community that stood ready to unite against any unfair practices. Ultimately, this situation had taught him invaluable lessons about courage, collaboration, and persistence. It reinforced his belief in the power of community engagement, how ordinary residents could band together to demand respect and transparency from those who govern them. As Mark looked toward potential future initiatives aimed at further enhancing their neighborhood's governance, he felt invigorated by the possibilities ahead and committed to ensuring that the rights of every homeowner were upheld. The experience had not only altered his perspective but also ignited a fire within him to foster an enduring spirit of activism in his community long after the shipping containers were gone. As the dust settled on their recent success, Mark Thompson and his neighbors began to envision what the future of their community could look like. The confrontation with the HOA had sparked a transformative energy among residents, and Mark was determined to capitalize on that momentum. They had successfully raised their voices, but the journey was far from over. Mark initiated discussions with other community members about establishing a dedicated homeowners association committee aimed at maintaining ongoing communication between residents and the board. This committee would not only represent the concerns of homeowners, but also facilitate regular town hall meetings to ensure transparency and collaboration moving forward. By creating formal channels for dialogue, they hope to prevent future misunderstandings and foster a sense of mutual respect between residents and the HOA. Recognizing the importance of education, Mark proposed hosting workshops about homeowner rights, HOA regulations, and effective advocacy strategies. These sessions would empower residents with knowledge and tools to navigate any potential conflicts in the future. He envisioned inviting legal experts and experienced facilitators who could share insights and provide guidance on how to advocate for their rights in a structured manner. Another pivotal step was addressing the ongoing relationship between the community and the HOA board. Mark emphasized the need for constructive feedback mechanisms that allowed homeowners to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. To this end, he suggested drafting a set of collaborative guidelines that outlined expectations on both sides. Residents committing to uphold community standards while the HOA pledged to consider residents' input seriously. Moreover, Mark knew that sustaining this positive change would require engagement beyond his immediate neighborhood. He began reaching out to other local communities facing similar issues with their HOAs, sharing his experiences and ideas for collaboration. By forming a network of like-minded residents across different neighborhoods, they could strengthen their collective influence when addressing common challenges. As he contemplated these future steps, Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that this experience had not only fostered resilience within himself, but also ignited a collective spirit among his neighbors, a commitment to holding their governing body accountable while nurturing a positive community environment. In closing this chapter of his journey, Mark understood that true change required persistent effort, open communication, and unwavering solidarity among residents. With these guiding principles in mind, he was more than ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that together they could create a thriving neighborhood where everyone felt empowered to contribute and engage actively in shaping their community's future.